The Ghosts of San Quentin. The Inmates Who Never Left. Echoes in the Walls. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just make you question everything you thought you knew about justice in America. It started on a fog-heavy morning along the San Francisco Bay. The cold mist rolled over the rusted gates of San Quentin Prison like a living thing, wrapping itself around the stone walls that had held generations of broken men. For most, the place was just a relic, a grim monument to California's darkest history. But for Detective Ryan Cole, it had become something else entirely. At 5:47 a.m., the call came in. A prison maintenance worker, a man named Victor Hale, had been found dead inside the old West Wing, a part of the prison that had been sealed off for nearly 20 years. When Cole arrived, the air inside was thick and stale, heavy with decades of neglect. Paint peeled from the walls in curling sheets, and the flicker of a single fluorescent light barely illuminated the hallway. The officers already on scene were uneasy. No one could explain how Victor even got inside. The doors to that section were supposed to be locked and welded shut. The body was slumped against a corroded metal cell door, eyes wide open, his face frozen in terror. His badge had been ripped off, and in his right hand was a crumpled note. It read only 3 words: "We never left." Cole crouched beside the body, his flashlight sweeping over the ground. He noticed something strange: footprints in the dust, leading down the hall and vanishing into the dark. Too many footprints. "Who else was in here?" he asked. "No one, sir," said the officer beside him. "Only him. There's no record of anyone entering this wing. It's been abandoned since the riot in '99. Cole frowned. He'd heard of that riot: 22 inmates killed, 4 guards dead, and an entire block burned to ashes. The prison administration buried the story quickly, sealing the West Wing permanently afterward. Officially, it was to prevent contamination. But locals whispered that it was something else, that the state was hiding what really happened that night. As Cole walked deeper into the corridor, he could feel it, a suffocating tension in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. He passed cell after cell, each one a hollow tomb. Then at cell 213 he stopped. Scratched into the wall, in uneven lines, were words that hadn't been there for decades, fresh enough that flakes of dust still clung to the edges. They lied about the fire. He took a photo, his gut tightening. Then he heard something faint, metal shifting, echoing through the corridor. "Hello?" Cole called out. No answer. He turned toward the source of the sound and saw it, a door at the far end of the hall slightly ajar. A rusted plaque above it read, "Records Room. Access restricted." Inside, the air was colder. The room was filled with filing cabinets and boxes stacked high, thick layers of dust covering everything. Cole's flashlight flickered as he scanned the shelves, but then his beam caught something new. A fresh cardboard box. Unlabeled. Clean. Out of place. He opened it carefully. Inside were hundreds of photographs, black and white mugshots, each with a small X drawn over the inmate's face. But something was off. Every single file was dated after the riot of '99, names and faces that weren't supposed to exist anymore. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a photo caught his eye. It was Victor Hale, the man who'd just been found dead. But the photo was old, decades old. The date on the back read, 1998. Cole's chest tightened. "That's impossible," he muttered. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind him. The door had slammed shut. He spun around, flashlight shaking. The room was pitch black now. He rushed toward the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the dark, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and approaching. "Who's there?" Cole shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. No response, just breathing. Low, ragged breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. When Cole finally forced the door open, the corridor was empty again. But as he stepped out, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the wall across from him, written in what looked like soot, were 4 words. "Check the execution logs." Back outside, Cole found the prison warden waiting for him. A thin, pale man with eyes that never seemed to blink. "You shouldn't have gone in there," the warden said quietly. "That part of the prison, it's not meant to be reopened." Cole held up the photo of Victor. "Then explain this." The warden stared at it for a long moment before looking up. "Detective, Victor Hale was never a maintenance worker. He was an inmate. He died here 26 years ago." The world seemed to tilt around Cole. He glanced back toward the West Wing, its shadows stretching long and dark across the yard. Because if Victor Hale had died here, then who had just been found in that hallway? And more importantly, why did the death records say he was never executed? The next morning, Cole filed a formal request for the San Quentin execution logs, but before he could get access, the warden's office caught fire overnight, destroying years of archived records. Someone didn't want the truth coming out. And when Cole received an anonymous envelope on his desk 2 days later, containing a single burnt photo with the word "next" scrawled across it, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The lost execution logs. The air around San Quentin had changed. What was once just an old, decaying monument of punishment now felt alive, like the walls were whispering secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Detective Ryan Cole sat in his car overlooking the fog-choked bay, that burnt photograph still burning a hole in his thoughts. The photo showed the same corridor where Victor Hale was found, but in the corner, almost hidden in shadow, stood a row of figures in prison uniforms. Their faces were indistinct, smudged by smoke or age. But one of them, Cole was sure, was looking directly at the camera. The word written across it, "Next," wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Cole drove back to San Quentin later that morning, flashing his badge at the main gate. The guards hesitated this time, uneasy. Everyone inside seemed to know something, but no one was talking. Inside the administration wing, the smell of burnt paper still hung heavy in the air. The warden's office had been gutted by the fire, the floor blackened with ash. A maintenance team was still cleaning up. But among the charred remains, Cole spotted something glinting beneath a collapsed drawer, a piece of metal, warped and scorched, with faint letters still visible, E-log 1997 to 1999. He slipped it into an evidence bag when no one was looking. Later, at his desk in the Marin County precinct, Cole studied the fragment. It wasn't much, but embedded in the metal was a melted piece of microfilm, maybe, just maybe, a piece of the execution records the fire was meant to erase. He called in a forensic tech he trusted, Dana Ruiz, a sharp, unshakable analyst who'd worked cold cases before. Together, they managed to extract partial images from the damaged film. What they saw froze them both. The film listed 7 names, all men sentenced to death after the 1999 riot. But every one of them was marked, executed, confirmed, and yet there were no corresponding dates. No times. No witnesses. No official signatures. "These aren't completed logs," Dana murmured. "They're drafts. It's like someone pretended the executions happened but never actually carried them out." Cole leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So, where did they go?" Before she could answer, the lights in the lab flickered, then died. The room plunged into darkness. The backup generator kicked in moments later, humming to life, but the computer screen where the files had been displayed now showed an error message. Data corrupted, access denied. Cole checked his phone. No signal. Someone was watching them. The next morning, he returned to the prison to confront the warden, only to find the man's office sealed with yellow tape. Warden Ricks was gone. Official story, medical leave. Unofficially, no one knew where he was. Instead, a woman in a state suit greeted him, Deputy Warden Amelia Cross. Sharp, polite, and cold as glass. "You've been asking questions that have nothing to do with your jurisdiction, Detective," she said flatly. "San Quentin's history isn't your concern." "Then whose is it?" Cole shot back. She gave a small, tight smile. "It belongs to the state, and some ghosts should stay buried." That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the facts in his mind. The footprints, the handwriting, the sealed West Wing, and the photo of Victor Hale taken before he was supposedly executed. Finally, he drove back to the prison again, this time without permission. He knew it was reckless, maybe even suicidal, but he couldn't let it go. Something in those walls didn't want to be forgotten. He slipped through a side gate near the infirmary and entered the west wing once more. The corridors were darker this time, the air thicker. The silence was unnatural, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. As he made his way toward the old records room, he noticed something new on the walls. Fingerprints. Blackened, smeared, as if someone had been clawing their way out of the cells. And then he heard it, the sound of metal dragging against concrete. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the far end of the hall. "Who's there?" he demanded. No response. Just breathing. Again. He moved closer, flashlight shaking slightly. The sound stopped outside cell 217, one of the cells listed on the melted execution log. The door was open. Inside, he found a single cot, a rusted sink, and a carving on the wall. Fresh. "We were never freed." He snapped a photo, and as he turned to leave, a voice behind him whispered, "Neither will you." Cole spun around, flashlight slicing through the dark, but the corridor was empty. Heart pounding, he ran toward the exit, his boots echoing through the hall. When he reached the main yard, the night air hit him like ice. He bent down to catch his breath, and that's when he saw it. A figure standing near the prison fence. Still. Watching. He called out, "Hey," and started toward it. But as he approached, the figure turned and slipped into the fog, disappearing completely. Cole reached the fence, scanning the ground, and froze. There, hanging from the chain link, was a prison ID badge. The name read Cole, Ryan, DOC 24115. His own name, his own photo, but stamped with a red word across the top. Deceased. He staggered back, mind spinning. Someone had forged it. Someone inside the system was trying to erase him the same way they erased the 7 inmates. As he climbed into his car, headlights suddenly flooded the yard behind him. A van pulled up to the gate. 2 men stepped out, both wearing plain suits, no badges, no insignia. One of them looked directly at Cole. "Detective Cole," the man said calmly. "You need to come with us." Cole's instinct screamed run. He slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching across the pavement. The van gave chase, its high beams cutting through the fog. Cole's heart hammered as he tore down the coastal highway, the old prison receding into darkness behind him. He didn't stop driving until the sun began to rise over the bay, pale light washing over his shaking hands. The truth was coming together, but it was darker than he'd ever imagined. Because now he knew, the men who vanished after the riot weren't dead. They'd been moved. And whatever San Quentin had done to hide, that was only the beginning. The transfer files. Morning light broke over the San Francisco Bay like a slow bruise, gray and unforgiving. Detective Ryan Cole hadn't slept. He sat in his car near a diner off Highway 37, the fake ID badge still in his hand, his name, his photo, and that single word stamped in red ink, deceased. Every instinct told him to go underground. But his conscience, that stubborn voice that had carried him through 2 decades of police work, whispered something else. Finish it. Before he could think twice, he called Dana Ruiz. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He cursed under his breath and drove straight to her apartment in Novato. The door was unlocked. The apartment was neat, too neat. Her laptop was gone, her phone left on the counter, and on the table lay a single piece of paper, an envelope marked with his name. Inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into his car's laptop. On the screen appeared a folder labeled Transfer Files, Q Unit. The first file opened to a list of inmate names, the same 7 from the lost execution log. Only this time, next to each name was a new label, Relocated, Program 12. Cole's stomach turned. Beneath the list was a document header. California Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation Research Division. The report described voluntary transfers to a private facility off the books, inmates selected for experimental labor and behavioral testing. All records were to be erased, and families told the executions had been carried out. In other words, these men were never executed. They were disappeared. Cole scrolled further and froze. At the bottom of the document was a name he didn't expect: Warden Thomas Ricks, listed not as an administrator, but as a program director. He leaned back, realization cutting through his exhaustion. Ricks hadn't gone missing. He'd gone back to where it started. The final line of the document read, "Project relocated, Blackridge Facility, Nevada Desert." He drove straight through the day, across state lines, the old prison van still haunting his rearview mirror. The road narrowed into a forgotten stretch of desert highway. Just before dusk, he spotted it, a concrete compound surrounded by chain-link fencing and motion sensors. No markings. No guards visible. Just silence. Cole parked a half-mile away and went in on foot. The sand crunched beneath his boots, every sound amplified in the empty air. When he reached the fence, he saw the faded letters near the gate: "Property of Blackridge Industrial, authorized personnel only." He slipped through a gap in the chain link and crept toward a dimly lit service door. Inside, the air was heavy with disinfectant and old metal. The halls were long and sterile, lined with security cameras that hummed softly. Then he saw them: 7 doors, each marked by a nameplate matching the inmates from San Quentin. The doors were reinforced, sealed tight. Cole's hands shook as he opened the first. The room inside wasn't a cell. It was a testing chamber, medical monitors, electrodes for lines. In the center was a chair bolted to the floor. Empty now, but the restraints were stained dark. A folder sat on a nearby table. He flipped through it. Each page was stamped classified. Notes described neurological conditioning trials and extended isolation response tests. They weren't rehabilitating these men. They were breaking them. Behind him, a door creaked open. Cole turned sharply, gun drawn, and there stood Warden Ricks. Older, thinner, his eyes hollow. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective," Ricks said quietly. "You don't understand what we were trying to do." "Where are they, Ricks?" Cole demanded. "Where are the 7? Ricks sighed. "They're gone. Moved to Phase 2 months ago. But you wouldn't believe me if I told you where." Cole stepped closer, anger rising. "You faked their deaths. You burned records. You tried to bury the truth." Ricks didn't argue. He just smiled, sad and resigned. "Some men can't be rehabilitated, Cole. The state wanted results. We gave them what they wanted: invisible inmates, invisible funding, invisible outcomes." "And Dana?" Cole snapped. "Where's Dana Ruiz?" Ricks hesitated. "She found this place before you did. I told her to leave. She wouldn't listen." Cole's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" Ricks didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the observation glass at the end of the corridor. Cole followed his gaze and froze. Beyond the glass stood figures, motionless, shadowed. 7 of them. He took a step forward. The lights flickered, then steadied. The figures came into view, gaunt men in faded prison uniforms, their faces pale and blank. One of them pressed a hand to the glass. The mark left behind wasn't blood. It was frost. Cole's breath caught. "They're alive." Ricks shook his head. "Not anymore." Suddenly, alarms blared through the building. Red lights flashed across the corridor. Ricks turned to him, desperation cutting through his calm facade. "You need to leave, Cole. You were never meant to see this." But before he could respond, men in black tactical gear stormed through the doors, shouting orders. Cole ducked behind a console, grabbing the flash drive from his pocket. Ricks raised his hands, shouting something, and then the sound of gunfire tore through the hall. When the smoke cleared, Ricks lay on the floor, motionless. The glass chamber beyond the hall was shattered, and the 7 figures were gone. Cole stumbled out through a side exit, alarms echoing behind him, the desert air cold against his face. He drove through the night, not stopping until the facility was a speck in the distance. Days later, he filed a report. The department sealed it immediately. Official statement: unauthorized investigation. Evidence unsubstantiated. The flash drive vanished from the evidence locker. Dana Ruiz was still missing, and every trace of Blackridge was wiped from state records. Months passed. Cole retired early. But sometimes, late at night, he'd catch something out of the corner of his eye, a reflection in the window, a silhouette standing too still in the fog outside his house. One evening, a plain envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photograph, 7 men standing outside San Quentin's West Wing. And behind them, barely visible, a familiar figure, Dana Ruiz. On the back of the photo were 3 words written in faded ink. Phase 2 begins. Cole looked up at the horizon. The fog was rolling in again. And somewhere in it, the ghosts of San Quentin were still walking free. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the truth only gets darker from here.